This is Christmas. This is a day that a lot of us never thought we'd see coming because the globalists have all the money and they're controlled by Wall Street and Goldman Sachs and the moneyed interest. And they have been jamming and feeding down our throat for years. Free trade is good for you. Free trade will help you. Free trade will control immigration. Free trade will stop wars. Free trade will make you live in peace and harmony. No, what free trade will do is ship your jobs overseas to the slave trade network of Bangladesh and Indonesia and China and Vietnam. They will outsource your job. They will shutter your factories, and they will put plywood on the windows of your factories dumped in the U.S. by Canada. So we can't even make the plywood to put on the factory windows that have been shut down. That's what free trade does to Americans. And all our cash goes flowing out to everybody else while we become the service economy, according to the Cato Institute, funded by the globalist slave trade network on Wall Street. Their view, you got to get this straight. This has been taught in the business schools, Harvard on down, Harvard, Wharton, the whole bunch of them. In the 80s, they took the view that labor was just a commodity, like a widget. And so U.S. labor was immaterial because labor was a commodity. And you want to find the cheapest commodity you can. It was not valued. So you find the cheapest commodity, labor doesn't matter. The only thing that mattered to the Wall Streeters of the 80s and 90s and 2000s was ownership value, shareholder value. All their economic models were built on ownership making more money. So if you weren't part of the ownership class, you were out and nobody cared because you were simply a commodity to be shifted around like sheep. And to buttress my point, when the financial collapse came, which Wall Street caused, and Goldman Sachs and all the gangster banksters caused it, made all that money, and they foreclosed on your home, what happens? The elites protected the elites. And they went to George Bush, and they went to Congress, and they said, we need $1 trillion by 5 o'clock to bail everybody out. And they got the money, and it was your money, and they bailed them out, and you got kicked out of your home, and they took your car, but that $1 trillion went in the pockets of the owners on Wall Street. And you got the shaft. That has been accepted doctrine in America for 20 years until this man comes along, Donald J. Trump, and says, I don't think this makes any sense. Now, I'm looking at this and, I went to Wharton and I went back in the 70s and I'm looking at this 3 ways to Wednesday and, this we're getting screwed. I'm going to stop it. You elect me president, I'm going to stop it. And that's exactly what he's done. So let's talk about this, focus on this Mexican renegotiation of NAFTA. And joining us now is Michael Stumo. And as you know, Michael is the president CEO of CPA for a Prosperous America, Committee for a Prosperous America. And he's been on the front lines with us and his organization for a very, very long time. But I wanted him to come on today to say, okay, when the fanfare is done, and I'm excited today, I'm not going to fool you about that. It's obvious. I'm having a great day. But I asked Michael, I said, come on, is this a good deal that the president made or not? And joining us now is Michael Stumo, President, CPA. Michael, great to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me. I just don't know what else to say. You just summed it up so well that I think anything that I add is just going to be, a downer. Go down from there.
Well, look, I'm a little fired up today. I'm a little fired up, Michael, because those of us that have been fighting this battle, and, we've been called so many names by the globalists, like just, out of touch and Neanderthal and all this. And, now it's working. But I know you and your organization, you really looked into, okay, let's look at this deal specifically that the president made with Mexico. You guys put a statement out on it. Just sum it up for us.
Sure. This is, there's some modest improvements in here. We've got, it'll probably improve the content of U.S. autos in the U.S., the U.S. content rather, as opposed to Mexican or other country content, because they have some things called rules of origin that have been strengthened. They've got some interesting labor content rules that 40 to 45% of the auto content has to be made by workers earning at least $16 an hour. And of course, Mexican workers, I think there was a BMW or another plant opened last year. They're paying their workers about $2 an hour, so that wouldn't comply. Agriculture is about the same as before. Probably the 232 steel tariffs are going to turn from tariffs into quotas, so it'll limit Mexican steel coming in on a quota basis rather than a tariff basis. So there's some good things here. A lot of details have to be disclosed, so the devil's in the details, but the president did say he's going to renegotiate NAFTA. He said he's going to terminate TPP. He's done both of those things. He's really taking it to China. There's no sense yet of taking our foot off the pedal with regard to China. That's really the most important piece. But and it's interesting that he's playing hardball with Canada. If they don't want to negotiate, they're not going to be included in the deal, and he may very, very well send a notice of termination to Congress at the end of the week in NAFTA. And Canada has some decisions to make. So a lot of interesting movements going on.
We're with Michael Stumo. He's the president and CEO of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. You can follow them on Twitter, CPA at Prosperous America, or email Michael at CPA at prosperousamerica.org. But Michael, the Canada thing is really fascinating to me because remember, he went to the G7 summit and he said he insulted Trudeau and he was mad and they had the big fight, right? Remember that? That was only 2 months ago. And he called out the Canadian government for dumping dairy, dumping milk, dumping timber, trying to put our loggers out of business. I mean, he called them out on the whole thing. He said the days are over. You can't dump. You can't subsidize. I'm going to protect my industry. You're out. And they basically thumbed their nose at him. Right? Trudeau basically said, well, you can go find a lake to jump in. I'm not changing anything. So he went to Mexico. So we got that. I mean, you talk about the art of the deal. So he gets that deal done. And now he's got Trudeau hanging by a limb. And he's like, hey, are you in or out? You're out? No problem. I'll go it alone. So the pressure on Trudeau right. Now, right? So now what does he do?
In those markets, Mexico depends on the U.S. market. Look, Mexico is not a consumer market for us. Now, Mexico is a place that our companies can offshore, get cheap labor and sell back to the U.S. And Mexico's big danger is being a transshipment point for Chinese goods when we cut off Chinese goods from coming in directly. Same with Canada. Canada needs our market. We don't need theirs. And the danger in Canada is being a transshipment point for China into the U.S. market when we block them directly. Prime Minister Goodhair in Canada went to China and said, hey, we'll do a free trade agreement with you. And the Chinese were not interested unless Canada was still in NAFTA, because Canada's value to the Chinese is to be a way to access the U.S. market. They don't have value to the Chinese otherwise. So there's a lot going on here, and China's, the big deal that has to be dealt with.
Michael, define what you mean by transshipment market.
Sure, goods that can't come in through the port of Los Angeles directly because we've blocked them because China subsidizes and we put on duties to prevent them from coming in. Then they'll go in through Vancouver, Canada, or through Mexico and come in through as if they're Canadian goods or Mexican goods. And that's the way a lot of steels come in, a lot of other products have come in. So that's why they're transshipment points to avoid some U.S. rules.
All right, so basically when the former Prime Minister of Canada went to China and said, let's do a deal. They said, no go, right? No go without NAFTA because you're of no value to us. You don't have enough consumer dollars to make a dent in what we need. We're after the U.S. market because, we have a $550 billion trade surplus with them. And in order to keep the cash flowing, we got to get access to their consumers. So if you're with NAFTA, okay, we can talk. If you're not, we have no interest. That's basically what they said, right?
That's exactly right. The U.S. market is of value to all these other countries as the big consumer market where they can get rich. And for years we've been giving our market away and screwing our own producers here and impoverishing the U.S. worker. And we didn't realize, we call it free trade. We say that, there's all these consumers overseas. No, the consumers are here. Overseas, they're mostly producers trying to get into our market. And the game for building a strong country is to build your own productive capacity, not to get cheap goods. And that's something we still need to learn in this country, that you've got to build productive capacity and build your employment and wages. That's far more valuable than a marginally cheaper consumer goods.
Absolutely. We're with Michael Stumo. He is the president and CEO of a coalition for a prosperous America. And hey, Michael, I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite people of all time that's also been on the forefront of this movement, Mr. Jack Davis in Buffalo. I know he was one of your founding sponsors of CPA, one of my founding sponsors of my show. And Jack Davis ran for Congress 2 times in the 2000 when I had a big fight with Dick Cheney, and the whole story. But he was on the forefront of this, and I just want to give Jack Davis a shout out. He's probably today, Michael, having a great day.
Yes, I'm sure he is. Jack is a pioneer on this. He's a true patriot, really wants production here, and has worked very hard with his plant and with every fiber of his being to change this country to value production here and American jobs.
Well, Jack Davis got it because he's a factory owner. And so he gets the whole thing because he has been living it for 3 decades. And when my son went to Cooperstown to play baseball, I took the train back to Manhattan. I had to go back a day early, and so I took the train back, I think, from Rochester, right? Does that sound familiar, Michael? So we drove we drove from Cooperstown to the Amtrak station in Rochester, and I went on CNN that night, and I'll never forget this. Coming off the back road, because there was no interstate, we took a back road, and we drove through Rochester from one end to the other because Amtrak was on the other end. And Michael, this was 2 years ago. My son played in Cooperstown, New York. I must have passed 30 or 40 shuttered factories, one after the other. I mean, just one after the other. I mean, it's stunning. I mean, I've been to the Midwest. I've seen some of the shuttered factories, especially in Virginia, the textile mills. But I saw like one after the other, just shut down, plywood in the windows, bricks falling down, chimneys falling down. It was a sickening sight. And it was like, wow, 40 years ago, I mean, this was like a manufacturing hub of the country with all these jobs and workers and wages, and now they're just gone. They don't exist. A ghost town. Crazy. I'll never forget that.
Right, and Bill Clinton's people, Larry Summers, George Bush's people, Greg Mankiw, all these economists, Paul Krugman said, it's all good, it's efficient. This is efficient. We got efficiency gains out of it. We're all better off. And it just wasn't true. It was never true. And like you say, when CPA started, we were in 2007, agriculture, manufacturing, and labor. We talked about the trade deficit and offshoring. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to listen. We were the redheaded stepchildren. And it's changing now. We've got to keep this change going on. Otherwise, China's going to be the new global superpower in 15 years.
I mean, what about the lie that was sold to the American people? And boy, I'm so glad you said that. This whole falsehood, Michael Stumo, this whole lie about this is efficient. A factory closing and 1,000 workers being put on the street is America efficiency because they're going to be retrained into the brand new economy. And it's just a transitionary state as we move from A to B. What a crock that was. That was such a lie that never happened. That was just poppycock They just got those workers out so they could, there was no transitional service, new efficient economy. They were just out of work, right? They never got trained for anything. They got out of work and we shipped the jobs overseas.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
They transitioned to food stamps, to opiate addiction, to Frappuccino servers, to Walmart greeters. And anytime you hear them talking about comparative advantage and efficiency, you know they are just totally drinking the Kool-Aid, and they're going to kill our country, because it's all about productive capacity and jobs. It matters where things are made. It matters where the good jobs are, where the supply chains are. And efficiency and comparative advantage are just happy words to say that we don't care if you have a job. You can go on food stamps or become a Frappuccino server.
Right, because the new thinking was it's about the shareholders. And so if you're on food stamps and you're serving coffee in Starbucks, or you're now a Walmart greeter making a quarter of what you made, starving to get by, it doesn't matter, because wages are lower, we outsourced your job, and the owners are making more money. And the workers don't matter. I mean, that's basically what the mantra was. I mean, I'm saying it in stark, ugly terms. They're very Larry Summers in them. They're very nice, flowing verbiage was just as you said. This is efficient, and you're going to transition into the new, 21st century economy, whatever the hell that is, doesn't exist. But that was a facade dumped upon workers with good jobs in order to pad the pockets of the new ownership shareholder class, Michael. You hate to put it in such dark terms, but that's really what happened here. That is what happened. It's now you and I and Curtis and others and the American Jobs Alliance, Jack Davis, now that we've got momentum, it is incumbent upon us to get the story straight and to get the truth out. And that's why, Michael, we ask you to come on every couple of weeks so you can tell the American people the truth. Thanks for being with us.